Hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming out today for today's speaker presentation. My name is Mahesh, and I will be your host today. Just some general comments. Please leave any questions for the end of the presentation by utilizing the Q&A function below. And today's talk will be featuring Jim St. Clair, and will be regarding decentralizing the patient identity in the next generation of privacy and consent. Now, just to give some background, Jim is the Chief Trust Officer at LUMEDIC and the founder of the Institute for Healthcare Financial Technology. Jim is also formerly a veteran and naval officer and is active in the Healthcare Committee for the Government Blockchain Association and also co-lead of the HIMSS Healthcare Blockchain Working Group. He has many years of working experience within this field and being in roles involving transformational technology services to assist public and private sector clients in understanding blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, and cloud technologies. With that being said, I would like now to pass it on to Jim, who will now begin his narrative. Go ahead, Jim.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you. And I appreciate everyone's flexibility today around the world of virtual meetings and making the schedule. My name is Jim St. Clair, and as mentioned, I'm the Chief Trust Officer for the LUMEDIC Exchange. Be happy to elaborate on that a bit. For LUMEDIC, LUMEDIC is a health tech company based in Seattle, Washington, as part of Providence Health Systems. And we are focused on a range of products and technologies to support both providers and patients in their health information management. And specifically, my concern around the LUMEDIC Exchange, which is the first platform in healthcare to be able to exchange verifiable credentials, which we'll talk about a bit in detail, for health-related transactions and patient-centered health information exchange. First, just to talk about the concept of decentralized identity. This is still relatively new for most people, but it is an evolution of the work over the last 5 years in blockchain and decentralized ledgers. And it is the concept that your identity attributes can be embedded into shareable but secure methods of being able to facilitate transactions. In the same way that we talk about privacy and zero trust in technical architectures these days, the concept that your identity is your own, of course, is very much baked into GDPR and other similar legislations, and is becoming more of a concept within the US and things like the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. The concept architecturally is that you use blockchain or distributed ledger to be able to securely share things in a collaborative environment as part of transactions, as I'm sure many folks in the audience are aware of. And the level of decentralized identity, you actually have specific blockchain architectures that create what we call decentralized identifiers or support transactions for verifiable credentials. So that you share attributes of your identity as part of interactions with other parties that, first of all, help support the attestation of who you are and what you're trying to do. Like, for instance, register with your doctor or prove that you have a vaccination certificate. But at the same time, also allow you to control what is shared as part of that transaction. So, case in point, most of us are used to presenting their driver's license and some other documentation if they're coming in to see the doctor. Those are all various elements of your identity and your privacy that you're sharing, and in many cases, repeatedly sharing. Even just, going to a bar and proving that you're over age 21 and having to produce your driver's license. In physically producing your driver's license, there's multiple attributes of your identity that are on that driver's license, when the only key aspect is, can I verify in some means or present a means of verification that says I'm the legal age to be allowed to be in here in the first place? And I shouldn't have to share my name and my date of birth and my address and blood type and everything else that's on a driver's license simply for the sake of gaining entry into a facility where it's a yes or no sort of check process. So by using things like the W3C standards for verifiable credentials in conjunction with the distributed ledger managing the transactions in a secure manner, you can create credentials and present them digitally in your own form of mobile wallet that allows you to meet certain criteria between the issuers of that credential, whoever that issuing party is, a verifier that has agreed to the framework for that, that credential issuance, and verify that you're presenting the proper credential to share information, gain access, or prove a certain status, all while keeping that information under your control. Another aspect to consider with it is how you can then leverage tying in that verifiable credential and managing that information with your wallet with other additional information. Nowadays, we are in a digital health type world where more and more of our health information resides in electronic fashion on electronic healthcare records. Those electronic healthcare records require various levels of access from providers and other systems. And then the challenge is that you have multiple instances of those healthcare record systems that perhaps one doctor you have to see is in one facility with one EHR system, and you're referred to a doctor at another facility with another EHR systems, and you have to exchange that information back and forth. There's been a great deal of effort, particularly over the last 10 years and in the last couple of years in particular, to establish new methods of interoperability to be able to exchange that information freely and securely to support your ability to see the doctor that you need to see, or have that information made available. And then most importantly, the latest trend in legislation is being able to make sure that you have access to that data so that you can see the information that's being stored about you and share it with third-party apps such as Fitbit or Google Health or other applications for remote patient monitoring, diabetes control, etc. Tying that all together, of course, calls out the need for a decentralized patient identity type capability where you're at the center for the decisions for how your information is being shared, who you're sharing it with, and then extensively what type of consent is associated with that. So in healthcare, they have a standards body known as HL7, with the newest HL7 interoperability standard being known as FHIR, which stands for FHIR, Fast Health Information Resources. And so the future trend will be your ability to manage your identity and connect that to those FHIR transactions and share healthcare information between one or more points, or with other applications and systems that you have deemed consent and authorization to for using for managing your own health. This represents a new trend as telehealth becomes more popular and virtual care becomes more popular, where you have more control over your information upfront through your own applications in connection with telehealth and virtual care engagements with your doctor, and decide how to be able to share that in a virtual a virtual encounter, or to exchange that information between one or more virtual encounters with individuals. That leads to a number of standards efforts that are all being developed. I've mentioned HL7 already. Within the identity community, there's a range of standards contributing organizations and standard development organizations. I'm sure everyone's familiar with ISO, the International Standards Organization, and IEEE. There's a range of work groups and organizations there that have all been developing standards for decentralized identity and blockchain management and governance. Within Decentralized Identity itself, I'm part of the Trust Over IP Foundation, and the Trust Over IP Foundation consists of about 100 members representing different organizations and companies that are contributing to an architectural stack for what we consider to be decentralized identity and trust principles. So those consist of developing governance frameworks and ecosystems models, which are built around regulatory requirements and frameworks of local governance constraints into ecosystems where you have issuers of credentials, verifiers of credentials, the holders as the individual credential and identity users, and then the legal framework that controls what the information must contain, how that information is to be protected, etc. Below that, the next layer, you have what we call layer 3, which is the technical aspects of a verifiable credential itself. And the verifiable credential is represented, as I mentioned, through W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and its standards bodies for the credential group. Also part of that is the Decentralized Identity Foundation, which has developed decentralized identifiers and other protocols for use with verifiable credentials for exchanging information. And then below that at the bottom layer is really what we call our layer 1 technology, our foundation, and that can consist of one or more blockchain standards. The greatest prevalence is around Hyperledger standards, specifically Hyperledger Indies and Hyperledger Aries. But there are other standards that leverage things such as Ethereum, variations of Bitcoin blockchain structures, et cetera, that are contributing to decentralized identity type foundations that can be plugged in there as well. The most important thing that we feel from a Trust over IP Foundation standpoint is that architectural stack and developing standardized approaches so that regardless of the particular variety of blockchain that you're using, there are standards for how those blockchains are interoperable and support the overall architectural stack requirements to work with verifiable credentials and support the governance and the regulatory requirements of a particular ecosystem. Obviously, my ecosystem focus is heavily on patient identity and healthcare information. And so that includes, regulations within the healthcare industry nationally and internationally, participation from insurance companies, participation from healthcare providers and healthcare organizations and other healthcare technology companies. We also work with organizations such as ID 2020 or My Data Global, if you're familiar with those, which set some principles and standards associated with identity in general and healthcare identity specifically that help support and guide what that ecosystem framework is like and contribute to thoughts about the technology and the architecture. So patient identity, as I mentioned, is changing very rapidly. It is an area that is beginning to also expand with considerations such as artificial intelligence. As artificial intelligence is used more and more in the healthcare environment, there has to be greater considerations for how is information shared with AI in the same way that you're traditionally used to sharing it with a doctor or in your clinical environment. And what kind of decisions are AI making that are constrained within the algorithms of the machine learning model that are outside of your control or don't involve human judgment or human oversight? So are there ways in which you controlling your identity and controlling the information that you share with AI helps govern that AI bias that governs the AI model where the AI is contributing to the patient engagement and the considerations for what kind of treatment you receive or what your virtual care plan might be. So that's another important point. As I mentioned also, things like third-party apps and remote patient monitoring. I'm sure many people are aware of or concerned about the fact that large large technology companies such as Google and Apple and Facebook and others have been involved in collecting user data for a long time. And are there concerns about how they apply their AI model or their big data model for information they've collected? So looking at the ability to insert the individual to manage their individual data and extend that consent model to be able to grant consent for how their data is used, even at a big global scale, is considered very important because this now allows you, again, like in the GDPR model, to extend your consent to say, I know where my data is and how my data is authorized to be used, and make decisions about how your data is protected or decide that your data is not to be used in something like a data analysis or an AI type instance. Remote patient monitoring means third-party electronic equipment and things that may be supporting information around your medical conditions are being monitored. That represents another network where your data is being collected and analyzed and included as part of your clinical care, which is great. But you also have concerns to make sure that that doesn't go beyond the boundaries of perhaps sharing with your doctor or your healthcare organization, and being able to extend your consent as part of that decentralized model becomes very important for considering how your data is collected long term, or what your longitudinal health data is that's being assembled by one or more electronic components in that remote patient monitoring architecture. And then lastly, things like the third-party health apps that I mentioned, like Google and Fitbit, You know, those are very helpful. I've got one on my wrist right now. But the ability to not only share more health data with them, which is what interoperability rules allow for, but also the ability to control what data is shared and how that data is shared with those applications helps you enforce granular consent and privacy to be able to make sure that only data that you want the app to see or that you will allow it to see is considered, and at the same time also be able to control how long that data is available to the application, or make sure that that application doesn't behind the scenes share it with another application that you're not aware of. The adoption of this sort of technology is still very new. It is really something that I think will be coming along in the course of 2021 and 2022. I'm sure many of you have read various articles about vaccination credentials or health passports, which is an active effort underway. And some of our concern in the community, of course, is making sure that things like verifiable credentials are applied for that, and that we aren't just creating new databases of individuals and information to add to all of the summary data and summation of data that is being collected on everyone on a daily basis. The other important thing is the ability to use distributed ledger as part of that to ensure that the data is the right data. Healthcare has a challenge in terms of patient matching and patient verification to ensure that if Jim St. Clair is presenting himself today, that I've matched up his identity with the correct record to make sure that we've identified medication allergies, known medical conditions, things that have to be looked out for. There is a tremendously high percentage of errors that occur on a regular basis because identity verification hasn't been completed properly. So not only are we concerned about just protecting patient privacy and patient identity, but also bolstering the aspects of that identity characteristics and attributes to help make sure that you verify the right person each time. That'll only get more complex when you have the ability to share your information with other apps or have those apps share the information back to your electronic health records, in making sure that the data integrity is in place that correlates the right data with the right person to the right records and doesn't complicate the ability for doctors and clinicians to do analysis and understand their healthcare. Other considerations are being able to meet international legal standards around privacy and data. I've mentioned GDPR, and as we become more of a global society, the ability for someone in one country operating under one legal framework to have a mechanism in place to share their identity and extend consent of their information when they're operating in another country. Conversely, if someone's receiving healthcare treatment someplace else in another country, that information is collected and stored in ways that may be in a different legal framework than what you're used to, or what your home country is. As a result, you want to have the ability to extend your consent model for the legal framework that fits you both culturally and legally to what you're entitled to as a citizen of that country, into how the information is being used in that system. Lastly, there's considerations for more advancements in clinical research and clinical trials. So if you consider that there's a number of big data and clinical analytics efforts underway, obviously, to be able to understand the novel coronavirus and COVID-19, and of course, what's related to vaccination credentials and the information from vaccinating people themselves, there's going to be more clinical analysis and research done both on the disease itself, how the disease manifests itself, the effectiveness of the vaccine, long-term observation of vaccinated citizens to be able to see if there's any changes in health or adverse reactions that manifest itself, which means a whole new longitudinal selection of data that has to be collected and analyzed, which of course brings up privacy concerns and challenges, because no one wants to have their data collected and stored in a database someplace for the next 20 years simply because of the association with the vaccination. So as a result, the ability to tag that data and associate it with a consent model where you're sharing specific parts of the information that are useful for clinical and research purposes, but at the same time being able to protect your identity and have that clinical research effort come back and request consent or authorization from you if there's additional information that they're seeking as part of a research effort. And then ultimately connect that perhaps with a compensation strategy or some sort of incentivization strategy to participate in, a clinical trial or a further research effort. All of that can be built into part of that decentralized identity information model using schemas and programming frameworks around the elements of data themselves, so that you can say, these elements of data I'm comfortable with sharing. These elements I want you to come back and ask permission for, or I won't share until you request permission for. And all of that is a very effective framework for being able to govern your information over a longer period of time than the simple sort of notice of consent and disclosure that we're used to now in the clinical research world. I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions. Obviously, the topic of patient decentralized identity is kind of new, and looking forward to see if anyone has any questions that we could ask. Not seeing any questions filtering in. Assume everybody can still hear me.
Yeah, everyone should be able to hear you. If there's no questions, then they can just ask later on or.
Fantastic.
Whenever.
Great. Well, I'll also spend a little more time talking about the Trust Over IP Foundation, if I could, please. That is, as I mentioned, that's an international organization. We've been around since last May. We are contributing across multiple standards type efforts right now. I'm also involved in ISO and IEEE. I have several of my colleagues that are involved in W3C, as I mentioned, as well as developing or involved in developing a lot of the code bases for some of the blockchain technologies that we're using. Membership can be free. I would invite everybody to go to trustoverip.org and take a look at joining as a contributor member. It falls underneath the Linux Foundation and operates under the Linux Foundation rules for open source development and contribution. And in that vein, it means that you're contributing in what we call an antitrust environment. So it's not competitive. Everyone participates openly. All the meetings are open amongst the membership. And you can contribute to one or more different work groups that are focused on aspects of technology, ecosystem development, standards development, or exploring new regulatory requirements and translating those into architectural consideration. As I mentioned, we do work alongside and contribute to other standards bodies. We also are in the process of developing webinars and a series of white papers that explain the architectural stack more and their applicability specifically to different ecosystems such as patient identity or legal frameworks. We've recently been working on one around mobile driver's license. The governments of Ontario and Canada is looking at digital identity, and we've contributed a white paper for their examination of the principles of digital identity and architectural stack for their consideration. As I mentioned, we have participants from Canada. We run chapter meetings to cover the APAC time zones, US and EU time zones, and things are pretty active in terms of representing folks from various countries and various regulatory frameworks and standard activities that are all included. Lastly, I'd also encourage you to go out and take a look at IEEE. IEEE has several work groups, and I believe they have now opened up a lot of their policies for membership and participation in different work groups. IEEE provides you an opportunity to see the integration between standards development around, traditional type activities like medical information or medical imaging, with aspects of blockchain and technology and identity, to be able to see the collaboration between different standards bodies in developing governance frameworks and information frameworks for decentralized identity, and then how that relates within a medical community. And of course, it's not, IEEE is by no means limited to just healthcare information. They have work groups and standards that cover across multiple industries. And most importantly, it's just taking a look at how technology is evolving and how international standards need to be able to keep up with and adopt new guidelines for using these new technologies as they advance. There's also a great deal of activity in organizations such as ID 2020, which represent multiple organizations around the world in just the principles of identity and ensuring that the principles of identity and self-sovereign identity represent opportunities for equity, for social good, and UN sustainability goals, and considering those sustainability goals as part of principles for digital identity, and most importantly, how to accommodate everyone so that digital identity in a non-native digital format can be recognized and taken advantage of, even for the underserved or middle income type companies or countries, excuse me. Just pausing again for any questions.
Hi, Jim. I actually had a quick question.
Yes, sir.
This is actually regarding blockchain, because I myself, I actually have a big interest in blockchain as well, and as well as the role of cryptocurrency. But this is more so a question for a lot of those people that are doubtful of blockchain, because one of the main challenges that I've kind of experienced and noticed is that, blockchain is still very heavily much connected to the crypto world, right? In the mind of many. And this can kind of be seen as like, a world of, that may have like, hackers or like, certain speculators or, some sort of slow capability and whatnot. So it kind of moves, just because it's so digital, it kind of moves away from the traditional aspect of things. So a lot of companies might be a little afraid to adapt blockchain technologies because it is not really traditional. So what would you say are some of the things that can be done to address this challenge?
That's a great question, and I think you're exactly right. Part of the challenge with the technology is the way that it has come about, and blockchain has inherently been considered with cryptocurrency. But if you think about it in the context of an engine in a car, the engine was made very popular because of race cars that go around the track and go really fast. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the engine in and of itself represents every type of car. And there are safer cars and there are trucks and so forth. I like to contrast blockchain to being that engine. And the blockchain technology that went into the foundation for Bitcoin, of course, as the first cryptocurrency, and now driving other variations of cryptocurrency, are what we call public blockchains. They're designed to work specifically around what they do for cryptocurrencies, but of course, cryptocurrencies have their own legal and regulatory and cultural challenges in the financial world. A lot of what we learned and what we designed architecturally around public blockchains have now been used in what we call private or enterprise blockchains. And that's where you're using the same software and architecture type concepts in blockchain into blockchain technologies that are specifically meant to be private or limited among their participants within an enterprise or a shared enterprise environment. Most specifically, the Hyperledger Foundation, as part of the Linux Foundation, has developed several different variations of their Hyperledger blockchain technology, which are all designed to be enterprise, private sort of blockchains that take advantage of what people understand about blockchain and the concepts of consensus and decentralized ledgers, but do it in such a way that it is contained within a limited number of participants versus a public type blockchain, such as a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum. By building your enterprise solutions for something like decentralized identity on something like a Hyperledger, that means that you are setting up specifications for participation and a governance framework so that only those folks that are included in the enterprise, and however you're defining that enterprise, are allowed to use that technology. So you have a blockchain system that is set up within a enterprise that is intended to be as secure as your other enterprise corporate systems that you may be using, and not something exposed to the public where anyone can just gain access to it. And to your point, potentially be able to manipulate it or make it vulnerable to hacking beyond the construct of how you're protecting your network already. Most importantly, the rules around how that blockchain operate are strictly limited to the participants and the other nodes in that network as part of that enterprise effort. And they're not globally or publicly available where anyone can just join onto it and influence the consensus model, for instance, or try and do what we call 51% attack, which were problems in the earlier Bitcoin and Ethereum type models. I hope some of that helps in that explanation and kind of guides you a bit.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Looks like we have a question from the audience. Implication that blockchain would be economic. Let's see. So I'm not sure exactly what you might be asking, but I do love to talk about aspects of gamification theory and econometric impacts for blockchain. So this does get a little bit more beyond like the hyperledger model I'm describing, which is an engine built specifically for decentralized transactions that we're using for identity. But there is a variety of hyperledger called Hyperledger Bezu that is aimed at being able to interact with Ethereum and support Ethereum token transactions. So beyond just cryptocurrency, you also have the ability to use Ethereum for tokens, which those tokens could be assigned value for some enterprise or some particular use case, and perhaps tie tokens and tokenization in with some sort of incentivization model as part of information sharing. So to go back to that clinical model again, for an example, say I'm participating in a clinical trial. I'm using my blockchain-enabled decentralized identity to control my identity and consent to my information as part of that clinical trial, but I get rewarded for my participation. Perhaps just being part of the trial earns me a certain number of tokens where all I have to do is be verified as a member of the clinical trial without sharing a lot of my identity and staying anonymous, and I earn a certain number of tokens. Maybe some development in the clinical trial comes up that by sharing more information specifically about me, more of my demographic information, it improves the clinical analysis going on in that trial. And as a result, I am incentivized to earn additional tokens. So you get economic benefits for consideration and participation in the trial in return for sharing more information. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't still retain consent to that information and allow you to say things like, you can have my information for 2 days or 2 weeks, and after that, you no longer have access to it. But that may be enough to perform the next step of a clinical trial and as such entitle you to a new incentivization and additional tokenization. The exciting thing is what I described to you architecturally and in terms of system already exists. It's changing the business model to be able to adapt to that and incorporate that into clinical trials now, which is really the hard part. And it's changing both, culture and business operations. I hope that kind of helps with the economic models here for some blockchain. Great. And any more questions? Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time today. Again, appreciate the flexibility for adjusting my schedule. And I hope everyone's having a good session so far.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim, for the excellent presentation and kind of showcasing your expertise and experience on privacy and data. With that being said, after this webinar has ended, you will actually notice a short survey appear on your screen. So if you could kindly fill that out, that would be greatly appreciated. That's for the audience and as well as our speaker. With that being said, yeah, thank you again, Jim, for coming out today, and we hope you have an excellent day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.
Take care.